Imaginary friends, mimics, and dungeons. The law of psychodynamic decay. Psychic energy cannot be destroyed, only integrated or left to rot. The lore breakdown, from friend to dungeon. This brilliantly chaotic piece of unified lore elegantly bridges the whimsical psychology of childhood imagination with the grim reality of cosmic horror and tabletop RPG mechanics, essentially mapping out a conservation law for creative psychic energy, tracing it from its purest form down to its decayed predatory baseline. The ideal cycle, the imaginary friend, or IF. The imaginary friend is not a babysitter or a pet, but a radical psychological defense mechanism, an externalized, autonomous slice of the psyche, acting as a pressure valve for the soul. The catalyst, pure and untamed childhood creative energy. The manifestation, an entity tailored to the child's psychological needs, as seen in Drop Dead Fred, Foster's Home, and of course, If. These are stable because they have a constant and dedicated anchor, the child's belief. The mechanical function, the photonegative mirror. An IF is not a manager. It doesn't sort logistics, enforce rules, or suppress chaos. Instead, it is often a photonegative reflection. Where the child is restricted, the IF is completely uninhibited. The permission to be whole. If a child is trapped in an environment of high stress, grief, or strict behavioral oppression, their psyche faces structural collapse. To prevent this, the mind projects an entity that holds the traits the child is forced to bury: mischief, playfulness, anger, or buried memories. The non-linear agenda. They don't have a 5-year plan. In Drop Dead Fred, Fred doesn't care about social etiquette or structural consequences. His chaotic behavior is a shock absorption technique to crack open Lizzie's emotional numbness. In Slumberland, Flip is the bombastic, lawless outlaw holding the keys to the grief-stricken subconscious. The unintentional bridge. The IF rarely says, "Let's sit down and heal your inner child." By forcing the host to interact with this externalized piece of themselves, healing happens as a byproduct of their sheer, stubborn existence. The host is secretly practicing how to love and accept their own shadow. Mythological and cultural anchors. This isn't a modern cinematic invention. The concept of an externalized, protective soul fragment or guide spans across centuries of human mythology. The Norse Folgja. In Norse mythology, every person has a Folgja, literally a follower, an alter ego or soul extension that takes the form of an animal or a humanoid figure. The connection. The Folgja is intrinsically tied to the individual's fate and character, often representing their hidden nature or ancestral strength. Much like an IF, it is invisible to everyone else under normal circumstances, appearing primarily in dreams or moments of extreme crisis to offer guidance, warning, or a reflection of the person's true spiritual weight. The daemon, classical Greece. Before the word was twisted by later theological frameworks, the classical Greek daimon, or Roman genius, was a divine companion assigned to a person at birth. The connection. Socrates famously claimed to have a daimonion, an internal voice that never told him what to do, but would distinctly warn him against actions that would compromise his soul. It was a photonegative of societal pressure. While Athens demanded conformity, Socrates' daemon gave him permission to remain an eccentric seeker of truth. The tulpa and thought forms, Tibetan mysticism. In historical esoteric practices, a tulpa is an object or being created through sheer willpower and concentrated thought. The connection. While modern internet lore has altered the definition, the traditional concept relies on the mind's ability to project a localized consciousness outside of the body. The entity is entirely dependent on the creator's mental energy to exist, acting as a sentient mirror of the practitioner's internal discipline or unexpressed desires. Shamanic soul retrieval and fragment spawning. In many global shamanic traditions, Trauma is believed to cause soul loss, where a piece of the spirit breaks off and flees to the upper or lower realms to escape damage. The connection. The IF is effectively the inverse of soul loss. It is a soul projection. Instead of the piece hiding away in the spirit realm, the child's mind deploys the fragment directly into the room. The entity acts as a guardian of that lost energy until the child is strong enough to reintegrate it. This brings us directly into the dark thermodynamics and the rot of level 2 and 3, the broken tether and the boogeyman monster mutation. 2. The creative void, the boogeyman. The catalyst? A failure or refusal to channel that raw creative energy. The manifestation. When the energy isn't given shape by a friend, the void under the bed doesn't stay empty. It curdles. The boogeyman, don't look under the bed, is born from the vacuum of neglected expression, a manifestation of fear and the psychological shadow. A thermodynamic reaction. A healthy psyche operates a closed loop. Energy is projected as an IF, does its work, and is reabsorbed. But when a home breaks, or abuse and despair enter the equation, the psychic temperature drops to absolute zero. The system loses its efficiency, the tether snaps, and the leftover energy begins to decay. The trap. Because it was never granted a loving shape, it is locked in a cycle of resentment, seeking vengeance for a separation from a host it never truly had. The mechanical function. The universe doesn't care why a child is suffering. It only reacts to the input. When a child is trapped in an environment of high angst, frustration, or systematic abuse, they lack the high-frequency emotional capital required to maintain a friendly, supportive IF. The law of neglected energy. Energy cannot just vanish. If a child's mind is starved of joy, the creative energy they would have used to build a protector is abandoned. It pools in the dark corners of their environment, under the bed, in the closet, and starts to curdle. Because they are tethered to the child's emotional state, they feed on frustration. The boogeyman as a psychological black hole. In Don't Look Under the Bed 1999 and Boogeyman 2005, these entities are born from trauma and the suppression of belief. The boogeyman is a failed IF, a photonegative that was never given a face, so it took the shape of the void itself. Cultural and mythological supports. Humanity's oldest myths perfectly document this transition from personal psychological rot to a localized predatory ecosystem. The Greek Alastor and the miasma. In ancient Greek lore, an Alastor was a spirit of vengeance, often born from a household's unaddressed crimes, grief, or domestic trauma, the exact mythological blueprint for the boogeyman. The connection. The Alastor wasn't a monster that wandered in from the wilderness. It was generated by the family's blood. It was a personified curse that haunted the lineage, feeding on their escalating misery and driving them further to madness. The Japanese Gashadokuro and Onryo. In Japanese folklore, when people die in despair, starvation, or state-sanctioned cruelty without proper burial, their collective negative energy doesn't dissipate. It pools together to form a Gashadokuro, a giant skeleton made of the bones of the dead, or pools into Onryo, creating a vengeful spirit. The connection. These entities are completely indifferent to why you are near them. They only know the agony that created them. They are thermodynamic consequences of a broken moral or societal structure, lashing out at the living to balance their own internal deficit of vital energy. The Buka and Baba Yaga thresholds. In Slavic folklore, the Buka is a creature that lives under the stairs or in the shadows of closets, waiting to drag misbehaving or crying children into the dark. The connection. Mythologically, these creatures always govern the thresholds of the home. Doors, ovens, under beds. They represent the boundary where domestic safety ends and the devouring void begins. They are the exact cultural precursors to the closet doors in Monsters, Inc., gateways between the human psychological breeding ground and the monstrous collective. The next descent, the loss of form. The tragedy of the monster phase is that it requires infrastructure to survive. They need doors, portals, or highly specific atmospheric conditions to harvest energy safely from their pocket dimensions. But what happens when a monster gets greedy, or desperate, or when the barriers between worlds completely fail. When they try to enter our physical plane without a tether or a portal to anchor them, their form collapses entirely. The mutation, the monster to the mimic. The detachment. Eventually, a boogeyman can break the emotional ties or specific tether to the child who accidentally spawned it, while keeping its negative charge. If it absorbs enough negative psychic energy, it detaches from the individual host, stabilizing into a distinct monster, little monsters. It achieves a dark autonomy, stepping out of the immediate under-the-bed vacuum, and migrates, now operating on a societal level. Pocket dimension. We can see the logical, industrialized conclusion of this in Monsters, Inc. They have built an entire society on a parallel plane, completely detached from individual children, yet entirely dependent on them. They treat childhood fear like oil or electricity, harvesting it through doors, portal thresholds, because they can no longer generate their own internal creative heat, like cosmic parasites living off the emotional runoff of our world. The bleed-through. When these monsters cross the threshold into our physical reality without an anchor, they lose cohesive form. They become mimics. Lacking a child's belief to sustain their molecular structure, they are amorphous particles rejecting physical reality, as seen in the Cloverfield paradox. The recruitment cycle. In Don't Look Under the Bed, a child's transitioning angst acts as an open invitation. The monster doesn't just scare, it recruits. It wants to drag the child's remaining energy down into its own low-frequency baseline.